Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has said there will be a review now into the safety of MPs following the killing of Sir David Amess.
Well, Sir Lindsay is calling for political discourse to change and to put a stop to the hatred that's aimed at our MPs, both outside and within the House of Commons. And he joins us now live from Westminster. Thank you very much for joining us after what must have been a very, very difficult weekend for you, Sir Lindsay. You've had time to reflect. First question, do you think that the days of senior Labour MPs, for example, calling senior Tory MPs scum, are now behind us?
What we've got to do is leave a legacy for Sir David, and I think nicer politics across the world. What we've got to have is more respect and tolerance for each other. And what we've got to do is recognise we may have political differences, but we don't have to use anger. We don't have to use hate, because all that is inspire other people as well. If we're kinder to each other, I believe the public will be kinder. And the media's got a role to play as well. Stop demonising politicians. Let's work together for better politics that deliver for the people that elect us. We can work together on that. This today is a sad day. It's been a very dark weekend, but let's see something nice come out of the tragic death of our great friend, Sir David Amess. And, of course, all our thoughts with his family. And his family have called for nicer politics as well.
The UK editor of ITV News has been in touch to say that he's been getting messages overnight, over the last sort of 12 or 15 hours, from MPs, serving MPs, who are saying they are seriously considering standing down at the next election purely because of what's happened. Are you worried of that kind of impact on the way that our politics works? That we're simply going to get good, decent, committed MPs backing away from the system?
That's the problem. What we can't afford is for terrorism to stop the democratic process. These people don't like our values. They don't like what we stand for. They don't like democracy. But democracy must always survive. And that's why we've got to work together and working very closely with the Home Secretary, our people in security in the Commons. We're all working for one objective, to make sure MPs are safe. But I recognise there is an issue about people coming forward in the future, about making sure MPs feel supported at the moment as well. We have a suite of measures out there that I want MPs to take up. And in fairness, not all of them have been doing that. And what we need to do is not a knee-jerk reaction, but let us reflect on what actually happened here. What can we learn from this? What we can put in place to make it safer? But what I'd say to colleagues, we won't give in to terrorism. Let's stand firmly together, shoulder to shoulder. And we've got to reassure people, we need to make sure democracy thrives. Not only do we need to keep the MPs and them not stand down because of this, but also we've got to ensure that people will come forward. That's so, so important. Otherwise, terrorism will win, and that cannot ever happen.
Yes, I know that you want to send out that message, but there will be families of MPs who say, actually, we're just scared for a loved one who might be at risk. I mean, Richard mentions these tweets from Paul Brand, the UK editor, ITV News. He says, I've had several private messages from MPs saying they're having agonising conversations with worried families, and it'll be those most committed to constituency business rather than those protected by security surrounding ministerial jobs who may go. Sir David Amess was killed while he was doing his constituency duty. And I can imagine that it's those people meeting their the members of their constituency, those people in desperate need, dire straits, perhaps, seeing an MP as a target in some situations, who are most at risk. What protection can you put in for them?
What I don't want to do is go into the details of security, and you wouldn't expect me to, because that also puts people at risk by discussing the measures that would be there. What I would say is we do have measures. We can add to those measures if need be. It's so important to protect and reassure my colleagues. I have a duty of care, not just to the MPs, to their staff and their families and the people who work in the House of Commons. I take that very seriously. You're absolutely right. We must do everything we can to make sure they feel protected and real support. We came from nowhere following Jo Cox to absolutely a huge suite of measures. The danger is that people become slightly blasé about their security. They don't take up all the measures that are available. I don't want to get into details of what we have, would that have saved David. What I would say is that what we need to do is reassure members and make sure that they know what's available and they take them up. The problem being that we've come out of a pandemic where MPs were not seeing the constituents for the right reasons. What we're now doing, and I held my surgery on Friday night because I had a very clear message, my constituents need me, they still need to see me, and I must meet with them to take up their issues and their problems. What I would say is we've followed the pandemic, we've got to reiterate, take security seriously. This is what you need to be doing. This is what you should be doing. We need consistency from the police right across the country so that MPs are treated equally.
Well, you talk
and
about
making
police,
sure they have the full backup.
You talk about consistency. We've just heard that in the last hour, police have arrested a man for making death threats against the Labour MP, Chris Bryant. So they're clearly on the case. Just before we leave you, Sir Lindsay, as a security expert and terrorist expert was saying on this programme about an hour ago, the problem is that, let's say that the Commons agrees in the weeks to come to have a kind of metal detecting arch, to have police security at surgeries. What happens when an MP is not at surgery, when he's going to the shops, when he's dropping his children off at school, when he's going on holiday, when he's cutting a ribbon at a school fete? You can't give them an armed guard 24/7, can you? So you could give them effective protection at their surgeries, but then the problem simply moves to another time of day, doesn't it?
And that's the problem, is it? And that's the balance we've got to get right. Living a life and having a life. I held the G7's conference in Chorley. That was about secure versus open parliaments. We've got to get that balance absolutely correct. The fact is, do I want to be like Speaker Pelosi, who cannot go anywhere without a 6 police escort, armed police all around, a marksman doing that? Is that a life I want? No, I want to be able to have my life as well. So we've got to get the balance right. We've got to judge it right. And MPs have got to do the right thing. The one thing we do is don't have a consistent pattern.
All right, so Lindsay Hoyle, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much indeed. So just to bring you up to date with that report, this man arrested in connection with a death threat that was sent to the Labour MP, Chris Bryant. South Wales police say a 76-year-old from Bridgend County was arrested on suspicion of malicious communications. This came on the 16th of October. Mr. Bryant said he got the death threat after calling for people to be kinder following Sir David Amess's death.
Extraordinary.
So let's talk to 2 MPs to find out about concerns.
Yes, joining us now are 2 MPs who've both been subject to terrible abuse and threatening behaviour. First of all, Tulip Siddiq. She's the Labour member for Hampstead and Kilburn. Good morning, Tulip. And Dr Lisa Cameron from the SNP, joining us from Glasgow, both with strikingly similar stories to tell. Before you give us examples of what we're talking about, let's go to Glasgow first. Have you been discussing with your loved ones over the last 48 hours, stepping back from politics, throwing in the towel, not standing next time there's an election?
No, I mean, I wouldn't like to see democracy undermined to that degree, but what we have been discussing is safety measures for my children, my husband, even my parents, because previously they've had a death threat too. So it's not just about the MP, it's also about family. And I think when you have young children in particular, that becomes a chief concern.
Are you frightened today in a way that you weren't frightened up until Friday?
Absolutely. I think it shows just how vulnerable we all are, how discharging our daily duties as members of Parliament, suddenly our lives could be snapped out, and the repercussions of that for family. I mean, my heart goes absolutely out to the family of Sir David Amess, who was a fantastic, compassionate MP. If this can happen to Sir David, it can happen to any of us. And it's really a frightening time for members of Parliament across the United Kingdom.
Tulip Siddiq, had you already made changes to ensure that you are safer when you meet constituents? Because, of course, 5 years ago, Jo Cox was murdered by an extremist, a right-wing extremist. But had that led to changes in the security of MPs?
That's right, Susanna. So 5 years ago, my friend Jo Cox was murdered. And bear in mind, Jo and I came into Parliament at the same time. We did our induction together and I knew her well. So after what happened to Jo, I did change the way I did surgeries. Previously, I had had people just turning up. My location was advertised, the time was advertised, and anyone who lived in Hampstead and Kilburn could turn up and see me. But in light of what happened to Jo, I then changed the method where I would book appointments and people would come and see me. I also had the local police assess the venue in which I did my surgeries. It was a Jewish community centre, which very kindly allowed me to use their space. And they already had security outside, and the security would check bags of everyone who walked through the door. So you're right to say I did change my ways of working. I also didn't advertise before I went to events on Twitter. I would always tweet afterwards and talk about the event and then put up a picture, but I did change things after Jo. But what I will say to you, Susanna, is that I did become a bit blasé in the last couple of years. I was very on alert after what happened to Jo, but on Friday, I was actually doing my surgery at the same time that David Amess was murdered. And that was such a profound shock to realise that he had lost his life carrying out a simple duty that all MPs do. He was a public servant and he paid a very high price for it. And it's something that's unacceptable. If you have disagreements with politicians, it should be resolved at the ballot box, not through violence and death.
But the trouble is, Tulip, I mean, you can have all the security that you would wish for during surgery and leading up to surgery and immediately afterwards. But what about, as I was saying earlier, what about when you go shopping? What about when you go on holiday? What about when you go to the school gates to pick up the kids? All of those things, you can't have round-the-clock protection. I mean, it just wouldn't be practical. What are we going to do about the threat, rather than how you personally, on the front line, deal with the threat?
You're absolutely right, Richard, and you've hit the nail on the head. Like, we are public servants. I stood for election in the most marginal seat in the country in 2015 because I want to represent my constituents of Hampstead and Kilburn. I want to give them a voice. And, you know, with all due respect to all my colleagues, I didn't become an MP to just hobnob with MPs in dark rooms in Parliament. I did it because I want to represent my constituents. I want to see them face to face. Just last week, a woman was brutally murdered in front of her 4 children in an estate not far from my house. Of course I went and did a walkabout. Of course I spoke to the community. And of course I spoke to everyone there. There's not even an option of hiding away. It's an attack on democracy. And what we've got to make sure is that there's a root and branch review. Sorry. Chris. Sorry.
OK, go, that's fine.
Oh. It just goes to show, you know, you're an MP with a family, Tulip, you know, and Dr. Cameron just spoke about the risks. Look, we will let you get back to your children, but, you know, just finish your point for us.
Just to say that it's an attack on democracy, and what we can't do is hide away. We will not let anyone who wants to intimidate us or threaten us stop us from doing our job. That's why I got elected, and that's why I'm in the job I am. And what we've got to make sure is that we have proper security arrangements for everyone, because what the stories I'm hearing worry me. My local police have been very good, but it can't become a postcode lottery where some MPs don't have any contact with their local police, where they don't get a response when they report a death threat, as you've seen this morning from Paula Sheriff, and other colleagues have said the same thing. It can't become a postcode lottery about MPs and their safety.
Tulip Siddiq and Dr. Lisa Cameron, thank you both very much. And you have our thanks for being the public servants you are in very, very, very difficult times. Thank you.
Absolutely right. And best wishes to you all. You know, it's a vulnerable moment, isn't it?